My name is Jason Higgins, and I am an intern with the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at the OSU Library. I'm in Stillwater at the library to interview Boyd Barclay and discuss his service in the United States military. This is part of the Spotlighting Oklahoma Oral History Project. Thank you for joining me today, Mr. Barclay.
Glad to be here.
Let's begin with when and where you were born.
I was born in Fort Worth, Texas, April 16th, 1940. My mother just happened to be there. I just happened to be there when I was born, so I happened to be there as well. Anyway,
So,
it was a trip. It was an accident. She came back here afterwards.
to Stillwater?
Yeah, no, to Oklahoma City.
Okay. And where did you grow up?
Oklahoma City.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about life during that time in Oklahoma City.
Oh, enjoyed it. Went to elementary school for 2 or 3 different schools, and then ended up in the 7th grade at Harding. I went 7th through 12th grade at Harding, which was at that time, it was a junior senior high school. They've changed the school systems now, and then after that, my first year, I went to Texas A&M as a freshman, and then I came to OSU after that.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about your parents.
My dad he started out, he was a lineman for OG&E until 1952. He fell off a pole and broke his back and both arms. And so then they put him to work in a desk until he retired from OG&E. And my mother was a nurse, an LPN, and she did that until she retired.
Lucky for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
Tell me a little bit about school growing up. What were your favorite subjects?
Oh, I liked history and English, and those are my favorite subjects, I guess, as far as I always leaned toward history and tried to study that as much as I could.
And did you play sports?
Yeah, I played football, and that was my primary sport. And we played when I was a senior. We played for the state championship against Ada, and we got beat like a drum by Ada for a state championship. But anyway, we had a good team until we met Ada, and then I thought I was good enough to play football, and thought I had a scholarship to Texas A&M, and that year Bear Bryant left to go to Alabama, and there were 3 of us from my school went down. Well, 2 from my school and another one from another school went down there. Thought we had scholarships, and excuse me, and then we didn't. So I came up here to OSU and thought I had a scholarship here, and he offered me said I had to come out and play, and that didn't work. Actually, what I tell people, I played football for OSU until I got hurt. They hurt my feelings. They said I wasn't good enough. So that's my story about playing football for OSU.
And were you involved in Boy Scouts or anything?
I was an Eagle Scout. I went through and it was a thing that so many of the kids drop out of it. My dad had been a farm boy his whole life and never got a chance to do any of that stuff, and so he encouraged me to stay, and I stayed. Got in it, became an Eagle when I was finally a senior in high school. So
Okay.
I'm glad I stuck it out and did that.
What was high school like growing up in the Cold War period? Were any of those issues addressed?
Well, to me, it was great. My friends, I went to a great high school and had, friends and that type of thing during the 50s. It was, we were concerned with the Russians and the atom bomb, and then they had Sputnik and the first one to go around, to go in space. But it was except having to worry somewhat about the what the Russians would do with their atomic bomb. It was really great. We really enjoyed it, and didn't have to worry about like the kids do today about no telling where you go as far as some Taliban's going to attack you, and it's felt pretty safe. And I feel sorry for my grandchildren now, what kind of country they're what kind of world they're going to grow up in, but with all the crazy things that are going on in the world right now.
Mm-hmm. And did you have other friends go to OSU as well from high school?
Yeah, four or five of us played the same fraternity, and so we were, and there were some others that went to other fraternities also that came to OSU.
And
So,
what other campus organizations were you involved in?
no, I didn't do a lot except chase girls, I guess. My main subject was that as far as any, none of the, I wasn't on any of the honor scholarship programs that, they let me escape when I left after 4 years here at Texas A&M. I did some, involved in a couple of the, can't remember them now, but my big regret is that we had a dinner and Knickerbocker, who was a ace in World War I sat next to him, and Eddie Rickenbacker, and at a dinner we had, and I forgot to get his autograph and have him planning to be a pilot. I'd still regret the fact that got interested in talking to him and listening to him and forgot to get his autograph, and he was a famous World War I ace, but I can't even think what committee I was on, don't remember. It's been a while.
Do you have a family of military history?
My dad was in the Air Corps, and both my uncles on his side, where both his brothers were, one of them was wounded in Italy, and my dad gets to stay here the whole time. And then on my mother's side, I had one cousin that was in the I had a couple cousins that were in the military, but as far as World War II, the only uncle I had was too old. But my dad and his brothers both served in World War II.
And so did you have an interest in air combat at an early age?
I learned about, I guess the main thing is somehow along the line I learned about Marine aviation and their close air support and developing close air support for the troops, and I think that's where I got interested in Marine aviation then. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about ROTC.
Well, I enjoyed ROTC. I was in an Air Force ROTC here. Back in those days, everybody had to be in for 2 years, your first 2 years. And I joined the the Air Force ROTC, but I hadn't planned to continue it because I had talked to the Marines about getting the Marine aviation and what it took to do, and so that's the route I took.
So why Marines?
Just the type of they were the ones that initially studied and formed the air ground support units, and I like the uniform. And the history of the Marine Corps. I studied the history of the Marine Corps. I just wanted to decide I wanted to be a Marine.
And did the women like the uniform as well?
Yes, they did. The women liked the uniform, and you get the gold wings on too. The women liked that too. When we were in Pensacola and different bases, yeah, that was a lot of fun too. I was single the whole time, so that was a whole different world then.
Did you have any college girlfriends here at OSU?
Oh yes. I got the typical Dear John letter from one of the girls who was going to graduate, and we were going to get married after she graduated. But after I was gone about, not quite a year, I got the famous letter, Dear John.
Where were you whenever you got the letter?
Quantico. I was stationed in Quantico, Virginia at the time. Yeah.
Okay.
And so that was interesting.
So
because we got it on February 14th.
Valentine's Day.
Yeah, that was a infamous day.
So, when did you graduate from OSU?
63.
Okay. Do you recall JFK's assassination?
Oh yeah, I was there at Quantico. Very much so. We were in a class. We were going to have a parade that afternoon at the parade ground. And the instructor was finishing up the day. He was just telling jokes, and everybody was laughing. And we were all second lieutenants in the class, and the captain instructor was telling jokes and just waiting for the class to end, with another captain walking behind him, and the captain instructor said, "Well, I guess Captain so-and-so here has something to say." And he said, "Yeah, the president's been shot." And we thought he was trying to be funny, and went, "Boo, it's not funny." And he said, "No, the president has been shot." And so everybody was excused to go to their rooms, and then we participated in, I've got a great shot of the cortege I keep in my office at, what's called the Argus. You look down into the camera to take a picture. I went up like that and just hoped I got a good shot upside down, and got a beautiful shot of the casket and the cortege, and I keep that in my office. And then we went to the funeral. They had the funeral, and what I say this today quite a bit is that we got there early, and because we were in uniforms, they let us go in, but we weren't allowed to take any cameras with us and we were probably just about 50 feet, maybe 100 feet at the most away from where the burial was. And none of the funeral I've ever seen is in color. And it was amazing to me as we were sitting there watching the Black Watch and Haile Selassie and de Gaulle, the president of de Gaulle, come in to the funeral in their different colors, and it was all in black and white. And I can't believe that none of it I've ever seen is in color, and the color was just amazing, seeing the different colors that they had, and none of the filming is in color. That's amazed me forever, that they didn't film it in color. And then we were right there, not very far from where they laid him to rest, and the family and all that, and none of that is in color. And they missed so much of it by saying, if you ever seen the Black Watch or the Haile Selassie, if you knew who he was the ruler of Ethiopia, and his black and red robe they wore, and then Charles de Gaulle stood above everybody else in his uniform, and head of France, and it was really sad that it wasn't done in color. And so we tried to see as much. We didn't go to the White House to stand in line for the cortege, but we did watch the being brought down to the White House. Like I said, the picture I got then, the morning of the funeral, we got there early to get as close as we could, and we were very close. And they wouldn't let us take any cameras, so I don't have any cameras of that.
Wow.
But it was historically, and that one picture I have is a great picture.
Wow.
Just having to take it upside down, I hope I got a good picture like that. But yeah, no, so it was quite a few days there.
And being a Marine during that time, how did you and your friends react to that, as far as patriotic ideas or ideas about going?
Well, he was the president, no matter whether you supported him or not. He was the president that was assassinated, and that, and some people were afraid that, there was going to be other, trying to kill other members of our government, whatever, all kinds of rumors came about. But it was unfortunate because no matter who the president is, you don't want him to get shot or killed or massacred or die. And it was a traumatic period. And we didn't, even though I wasn't old enough to vote for him then, because he had to be 21 when he ran, but I wasn't a supporter of his, but I was very sad that had circumstances.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, as an officer in the Marines, did you endure the training that the enlisted men did?
Well, we go through OCS, which is similar. An officer's training is more, you do the physical stuff, and that kind of thing. You do probably a little bit more on the mental harassment, see how you can handle mental pressure. But we have getting up the first morning, the DI throwing a trash can down the squad bay and running down with his swagger stick down the racks, the beds, yelling, get up, and getting out, and it's all very similar to what they do. Probably, like I say, probably a little bit more of the mental pressures put on the officers than the enlisted men. But, and all the physical stuff.
Tell me a little bit about how the Marine Corps took individuals and molded them into a cohesive group.
Well, it's just it's a more or less an indoctrination type thing, as far as like during the weekends, when the weekend was off, they played patriotic songs, and the Marine Corps hymn constantly on the, and you learn to you learn to take care of the guy next to you. I mean, that's the most important thing, is the teamwork and the team ability to work together, and that's where it goes from the you would say the close order drill to out in the field. You start with a 4-man. The smallest units are called a fire team, and you have a 4-man unit that is led by a team leader. Then you go to the next side, it's a squad, and then the platoon, the company, and you learn to work as a team, and that's the big thing, is as far as, and not leaving here. And that's what I've been going through for several years, as far as, I guess you've seen the part about where they, a case at Chosin during Korea, where they brought out all the dead and wounded, and that's, you tell them, and that's one of my problems I've had for all these years and still have, is that we had to leave the other pilot's body there, and that's another story. But it's a teamwork, and when I get into that story about when I got shot down, I'm alive today for 3 reasons. I always give the short story is I'm alive because of God. Number 2 is my Marine Corps training, and number 3 is the 2 young Marines that dragged me up side of a mountain on their hands and knees, because my leg was broken too, also. And it was that, you just from day one, it's a team effort.
Now, this is 1963. Were there minority officers training with you?
Pardon?
Was there any minority officers during that time?
Not many. No, there was, in our outfit, I think there was just a couple of blacks,
And during your training,
Mexico.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
and would you describe the other men you were training with as working class or middle class?
Well, I didn't know anything about them, but they had a college degree.
Right. Okay.
Or they were working on a college degree, because we hadn't finished our college degree yet, but they were all working on a college degree, so they'd be you probably consider the upper middle class, but as far as I know, there was, among our guys, there was no feeling of discrimination or that type of thing,
Okay. Interesting.
The best Marine I had ever under my command was a black Marine, and I brag about him all the time.
It's good to know. So during your training, this is early, 63 going into 64. At what point did you become aware of the situation in Vietnam and the escalation of the war?
We heard about some things going on. Well, we had known about Dien Bien Phu and about the French deciding to make their last stand in a valley, which is, it was ridiculous. And we knew that part about it. And we knew somewhat about the fact that they had stopped having a election to unify the North and the South.
Mm-hmm. So, tell me a little bit about when you got your orders for Vietnam and how you prepared yourself.
Well, I was, first time, it's a long story, I have no short stories. I'd gone in to be an aviator, and I've known those things like February 14th. February 14th, I got Dear John from my girl. I got orders I wasn't going to flight school, I was going to artillery school. The captain called me a liar, and I had a car wreck all that day. February 14th, 1964.
Wow.
It wasn't a good day. Anyway, what happened, I had made the mistake of being honest, saying I'd been knocked out playing football in high school. So I had to go up to Bethesda one day to have neurological tests and passed them all. And there was a little group of Marines, this was in early '64 before Vietnam had broken out, that they were short artillery officers, and this group of us that had to go for extra testing, which we passed, were all assigned to artillery officers. So I went to artillery school and then went to Okinawa. We had been to Thailand, so we didn't have orders. See, in '65, 2 Marine battalions landed at Da Nang to secure their base. Mm-hmm. We were in Thailand with an operation of the Thai Marines, and we were heading back to Okinawa. And then they diverted us to go to Vietnam, so we didn't have, all we knew that the 2 Marine battalions were there at Da Nang, and we were going to be going, and had a bunch of guys coming and going, and being reassigned. We ended up in our battery, 6 first lieutenants and 2 second lieutenants, and so the battalion commander just made the senior first lieutenant the CO, second senior XO, the next one FDO, fire direction officer. I was the 4th senior, so he made me the fire support coordinator, which meant I'd be attached to infantry battalion to coordinate the supporting arms. And so I really there wasn't anything such as getting prepared. We were heading to Okinawa, and then we had the briefings about going to Vietnam. I know the greatest Marine officer I ever worked for is Major Mark Moore. He made a 2-star general. He died last year. I'll never forget him and his briefings. We were aboard ship, and he said that, greatest understatement in the world, he said, we learned our lessons in Korea, and we won't make those same mistakes again. And greatest understatement in the world, because they didn't learn their mistakes in Korea, but he was still the greatest officer I ever served with. Became a 2-star general.
And so you didn't have a chance to really prepare, but did you send a letter to your family?
I actually go back, see when the Turner Joy and the Maddox were attacked by in August of '64. We were in the Philippines at the time, and as soon as that happened, they had flapped us out, and we went to the coast of Vietnam, and we floated up and down the coast of Vietnam for 67 days, anticipating, where we'd be set in. What was funny about that. At the time, that was when the '64 elections, and
Mm-hmm.
that's when Goldwater was running against Johnson. And we'd sit there at night, our ships were blacked out, and we'd watch the firefights on shore, the NVA and South Vietnamese fighting, and see the flares and the tracers, and we'd say, Goldwater wants to send us in there, and people are getting killed in there, We may Marines, but we ain't that stupid, So, I mean, we all voted, most of us voted for Johnson then. On our absentee ballots, we had the ward room all filled with absentee ballots, voting our ballots to go back home, and then we voted for Johnson, and that was in October, because we had to have them in for November '64, and then next thing we know, early '65, we're in Vietnam, thanks to President Johnson.
So you were politically against escalation at the beginning then. It's interesting.
Yeah, we didn't see. The problem is we were above. We were only getting the news we were getting from magazines and newspapers, and we really weren't getting that many intelligence. We had some intelligence guys coming. It was funny. Some guys, NCIS guys, would come in and give us these stern briefings on not telling anybody where we were, and then it'd come out in Time magazine exactly where we were. We'd get a magazine from them, and so escalating wasn't the word. It was just the fact that we weren't that knowledgeable exactly of everything that was going on. But if we needed to go in, we would go in, which we did in '65, and there's where I learned. I was a naive guy, a boy from Oklahoma. I went to Oklahoma State University, and had always assumed that when you saw something in the newspaper or read it or saw it on TV, you'd be told the truth. And there's where I learned. I don't know if you talked to other guys about this too, but there's where I learned that, the newspaper, they weren't interested in reporting the news. They wanted to create the news. And in more one instance, that we saw that happening, where they wanted to create the news, forget their headlines, instead of reporting the news. And this followed on through, and probably everybody that ever is involved with any newspaper over there will probably tell you that they wanted to create the news and not report the news.
Can you give us an example of a particular situation you were involved in that was reported falsely?
They were all. This is a demanding thing they did. It was not so much creating. I got into creating the news again, but one day right here first, we were having a firefight. One of our infantry companies was in a big firefight, and two Jeeps pulled up down in front of my tent. I don't know why they came up to me first, because I was the FSC tent operation, which was being run by the CO, and the XO was next to me. And these eight reporters walked in. I'll never forget. One of them had a lime leisure suit on. I'll never forget. I don't remember. They all flashed their IDs, and one had on an Australian bush hat. And they wanted a helicopter. I said, "What are you in a helicopter for?" And they said, "We want to go out to see the firefight going on." I said, "Number one, I don't have authority to give you a helicopter. If I did, you wouldn't get one, because we don't have any extra helicopter." And so the next door is where the operations officer is. If you want a helicopter, you can talk to him. I guess they assumed I was a first lieutenant and I could be intimidated, and they started demanding a helicopter. And I said, "You can have a helicopter." My driver was Leroy Zepp. He had flunked out. He's a former Florida State football player. Big old, tall, 6'4", blonde-headed kid. I said, "Leroy," he says, "call the troops and tell them that if these people aren't out of here, throw them out." And Leroy yelled, Hofer, and Hofer came back, yeah, Leroy. He says, come a running. What for? Oh, we're going to kick some ass. And I hear boom, 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 I hear my feet. These guys run out, and they're looking inside my tent, and Leroy stands up, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and they started backing out, and they were cussing me about. Excuse me. Wanting a helicopter, and I don't care what you're gonna do, send me home, you know, you're gonna get in a helicopter. And there were 8 of them, 8 reporters demanding a helicopter. Then shortly after that, we had a guy show up. He said, his identification said he was Life magazine, and he wanted to go out. One of my jobs was to send out the Fort Observers on patrols. The Fort Observer team was 4-man team for artillery or naval gunfire. And he came to me and he says, I understand you're in charge of sending out those Fort Observer teams. I said, right. He said, well, I'd like to go. I said, well, they're all out on patrol or on outposts. I said, I'm not sending anybody. So I've got a team sitting here and not doing anything. So this reporter got the Fort Observer team, got them over by a bunch of bushes, and had them act like they were on patrol, taking pictures. He was taking their pictures. They were, not supposed to be snooping and pooping. And we were all just standing around laughing at him. And he must have taken 30 pictures. I said, is this really going to be in Life magazine? You're out on patrol and these guys, and they're trying to find the bad guys. And he said, well, maybe. I don't know if it was in Life magazine, but he was making up his story. And I had a good friend. He was a major and operation officer, and they had a big firefight going on, and all they were doing was, like I told these reporters, all I'm sending is ammo and getting out the wounded and sending water. And they had a reporter embedded with them, and they had a big firefight, and this reporter kept yelling, get me out of here, get me out of here, get me out. And the sales says, you're not going anywhere, all I'm sending out's wounded. And his driver, his radio man said, sir, do you want me to shoot him? And he says, no, but just shut him up. So he hit him with his .45 and knocked him out. Yeah, oh God, he says, now we're in trouble now. We're all going to go to jail because you cold cocked him. And he came to, and they doctored him up and had the corpsman doctor him up. When his article came out in the magazine, he was wounded serving with the Marines in a combat action, and then he observed his badge on his head where he was wounded, but he wasn't. He was knocked out by the radio operator. And
did you ever go on these assignments with any journalists who actually were fairly courageous and stood their ground in the firefight?
I mean, personally wasn't. I'm sure there were guys that were. I never was around that many of them. As far as I know, one time we were having a briefing, and this one was I was just a first lieutenant, and they had colonels and everybody around on a briefing. I was standing back to back of everybody, and he's asking me my opinion. I said, I'm just a first lieutenant. I said, I don't know the answers to those questions. And he talked to them. And he said, what do you think? I said, well, I think. And it came out in the magazine, Informed Sources say. I was an informed source. I was a first lieutenant, didn't know beans from anything, and then what on the big level, it was funny. But, as far as other guys had more, higher ranks probably had more actually involvement. They tried to, when they were trying to intimidate me, it was I knew in the war. They figured they could intimidate a first lieutenant, I guess, or something. But
So let's back up a little bit and talk about your first couple of days in Vietnam. What were your impressions? How did you get there, and what was it like?
Well, my first tour, I was there twice.
Right.
But
Your first tour.
First tour, we landed, and what was funny is we made a regular amphibious landing at Phu Bai, up north, and there's a bunch of Vietnamese girls with a big, huge sign said, "Welcome, U.S. Marines. This beach secured by such and such army unit."
Right.
This army unit had been there and hadn't had a base there at Fubai. It was funny, but we just set up camp there, and we started sending out patrols, looking for the bad guys, and that type of thing,
What area did you operate most in your first tour?
Up north of Da Nang. Where's up north?
Okay.
North of Da Nang.
What was the terrain like there?
Oh, there was small, it wasn't flat, hilly, it was hilly.
Okay.
And went down this one hill, and there was a river. I can't even remember the name of the river. There was a small river, and then it went uphill over across there, and it was mainly hilly. And that one valley that went down to the river, and most of the bad guys were across the river. But we did take a Vietnamese village that had all kinds of these crude. Back then, they had all kinds of crude traps and things. I have pictures at home of bear traps they used and homemade one-shot pistols they had, and one of the neat ones we found was this bow was about 8 feet long, and they had it set parallel to a L-shaped path, and they had about 8 arrows on it. And as you walked around this L-shaped path, you tripped the trip flare, and these 8 arrows would come flying towards you. Very primitive, like very primitive, And I have a picture of that.
Interesting.
And bear traps we had, and a very crude. They had it was a one-shot sort of a miniature mine where it was made out of wood, and they had it set on a nail, firing pin on this round set nail, and all filled with glass and gunk, stuff like that. And you'd step on it, and it would act as a firing pin and fire the round into your foot, and all that stuff around it would explode. Back then they had all kinds of just crude and rude stuff, and I have lots of pictures of those that we captured.
Were punji sticks used a lot during that
they're
time?
punji sticks, yeah. All the time I looked out, I stepped in one, but it was full of water, and the water kept my balance, and I didn't step on it, but they had punji sticks around.
And were these areas heavily populated by civilians? Or were they populated at all?
This one was, like I said, a VC village, where they had all kinds of crude, things. You step on things to alert that they were there. After we took that village, the General Lewis Wall, 3-star general, wanted to see it, so we all hung around there when the general came in to see it. But there were villages, and we had a lot of people-to-people work. We tried to, really get to know the people and let them know that, when we first landed in '65, they told the native women we would eat their children and draft their men in the army and rape their women, and had all types of terrible stories. And so we tried our best to have a people-to-people thing, and have our corpsmen down there helping their kids that were ill, and that was we gained a lot of their confidence when they realized that right there at first we weren't out there to hurt them or hurt their children, and we did a lot of that. And that's stories like May Lai and stuff like that are aberrations, as far as we really did our best to try to to have a people-to-people program and show them.
What was the standard of living for these civilians during
It's
this
just
time?
crude. You know, I'll never forget, we were driving through a village once, and a woman was sweeping out the dirt floor of her hut. You know, I mean, it was watching her. You know, we got a kick out of the fact her floor was dirt, and she was sweeping out the dirt out of her dirt floor of her hut. You know, and so, and they were where we were. They were nice young men that laughed, but you know, they, you know, we had great. Our enlisted guys were great, trying to, you know, give them candy. Always, whenever we're out in trucks or vehicles and convoys, our kids were always throwing them candy. You know, we had one that the kids made. One day somebody called from the outpost and said that there's a Marine walking down a road down there by himself, and we started counting heads. There was this Marine, Ernie, who had just taken off to go down and on his own and give the candy to the kids, you know, and then they made friends with him, and whenever our vehicles would go through that village, they'd yell for Ernie. You know, the kids would yell, Ernie, Ernie, and everybody throw him candy, you know, and so Ernie became their buddy, even though it shouldn't have been where he was, but by himself. But
And this is all part of the hearts and minds,
yeah,
right? And I've also heard where corpsmen would give immunization to children.
Yeah.
Were there any reactions from the VC to the South Vietnamese civilians that you witnessed as far as their interacting with the United States?
Well, they'd laugh me personally, I'm trying to think any, that they had them scared to death. And what I saw personally, I can't address. A lot of my friends address the fact where they assassinated the village chiefs or the province chiefs, where they showed friendship to the Americans. But I personally never saw anything like that, except just what I heard from other guys. You know, so I can't, you know, say that I saw it specifically, you know.
And you operated with artillery. Can you take us through a typical day of in the field? What were your roles, duties?
Well, a couple of neat things happened were that Major Moore, have you ever heard of Chesty Puller? Have you ever heard that name? Mm-hmm. Chesty Puller was the patent of the Marine, you know. And Chesty, he was, in Chesty's book, Major Moore is his aide when Chesty has his heart attack. And so through Chesty, he got to know a lot of people as a junior officer. And one day, we had the Newport News, the cruiser, on station to give us naval gunfire. And I was getting naval gunfire missions, and General, I had to coordinate with all the services, Air Force and Navy and everything. And the Newport News came back and said that the quickest reaction time they could have would be 45 minutes before they could have a fire on target. And I went to Major Moore and I says, that's not enough time. In 45 minutes, we'll have people dead. We need a quicker reaction time than 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. So Major Moore thought a minute. Yeah, let me see. Yeah, that seems like Admiral so-and-so. I knew him. And he takes off. He goes up. Goes down to the name. Pretty soon he comes back. You got 15-minute reaction time. He didn't know some admiral that he had met through General Krulak, and so then we started getting our naval gunfire missions. Now they're getting canceled by the Air Force, and I don't understand why, but We got a naval gunfire mission, and no, ceasefire. Air Force doesn't want you to fire, so I go to Major Morris. And now the Air Force is canceling our naval gunfire missions. He says, seemed like I knew General so-and-so. He takes off and goes down to name. He comes back and see the thing about naval gunfire is more of a line of sight. It's not like artillery that goes up. Well, the beginning of their approach into Da Nang was right where our naval gunfire was, and they were afraid that the naval gunfire might shoot down their planes, but it was underneath where they would start their approach into Da Nang. And he came back and says, don't worry, we're not going to have any more canceled like that. I mean, it was that type of coordination and, working with those guys that, that was a typical day. And like, all right, when I first got there, when he first got there, one of my jobs was we had patrols going out. And one of my jobs was to have two 105 howitzers. They would have these checkpoints where they would check in, and when they checked in at that point, I'd have two 105s there in that direction in case they needed artillery support. Well, for some strength, we had to give an overlay of our routes, patrol routes to the South Vietnamese, because they were our friends, and we they're supposed to know where we are. Every time I'd give an overlay to the South Vietnamese, we got ambushed in the best ambush spot there was. So I went to Major Morris's, sir. Every time I give him an overlay, we get ambushed at the best spot. Make up a different overlay for the Vietnamese. So we had an overlay on the map where our troops were, and I'd give another one to the South Vietnamese, and we didn't hit any more ambushes because they were looking for our guys somewhere else. One of their spies in the Vietnamese outfit there were giving them, and so our guys were going on these patrols without getting ambushed.
So this is basically counterintelligence almost that you're working with here.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So was there a lack of trust between Arvin and the Marines during that time? I mean, obviously what you just meant.
Well, we were, one of my jobs, occasionally I would go out on patrol too. I'd be short of fort observer, so I'd go out and maybe as a fort observer. I was out on a patrol once, and this kid, his name was Hofer, he was from Philadelphia. And we're with a South Vietnamese unit, and we take a break, and they lean against this tree, and the South Vietnamese says, "Me no like it here." And old Hofer says, "How come?" He says, "Me a long way from home." He said, I'm from Saigon. And Hofer grabbed him and says, "Son, I'm from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I'm a long way from home too. You're going to stick right by me and don't leave me at all, And so, me don't like it here, me from Saigon, I'm from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, And so there wasn't a lot of trust to the South Vietnamese lot, but there were good units there. I mean, I knew some advisors that some of them that were pleased with them and said they were good, And I'll tell you, I don't know if you want. Well, I can tell you, you out of this out. My daughter graduated from Southern Cal's Film School, her degrees in directing and producing. And 17 years ago, she was working on a movie over in Thailand. She called us and said that she was going to go with some of the friends, the crew, on a tour of Vietnam. I thought, okay, that's fine, We didn't hear from her for about 2 weeks. And she calls us and says she had her trip, but everybody chickened out. She went by herself. She went from Saigon all the way up to Hanoi over a 10-day period by herself.
Wow.
I'd got shot down. She knew I got shot down at Quezon, and she wanted to see Quezon. And well, back then, this 17 years ago, they weren't having tours of Saigon because of the unexploded ordnance. And she came back and she showed probably from here to that door over there was an unexploded 250-pound bomb. A little bit further was an unexploded 500-pound bomb. I said, Emily, if that had gone off, you'd been spaghetti. She didn't know the difference. But, that's a pretty gutsy trip for her to go. I wouldn't even want to do it myself, go from Saigon to Hanoi by myself.
Right.
But she did it all by herself.
Wow.
And anyway, that's
I'm sorry. Go
that's
ahead.
just an interesting side story as far as, because she'd heard about all my stories about it, and she wanted to see it herself.
Absolutely. So, operating in your first tour, was the enemy mostly NVA or VC?
VC.
VC. And so they weren't uniformed?
We killed, it's in a book. Can't think of the name of the book. I've read all these books. We killed the first uniformed NVA. We had a bridge, a squad on a bridge, and they got hit one night, and they radioed back that they'd killed a uniformed NVA. So we went all the way down to headquarters to MACV with the report they'd killed, and this was probably April, May of '65. And they wanted that uniform. Well, Great Major Moore, the great major he was, said, I'm not going to have my men dig up a dead body and just to get the uniform. He radioed back and said, the natives have taken the body, but we do have the hat. If you want the hat, we'll send you the hat. Then one of those pith helmets, they wore. And so he sent them down to the hat, but he refused to have his Marines dig up a dead body. And another shows why he was a great officer is, having his men out there in the middle of the night digging up a dead body. I can't remember what platoon it was, but it's in one of the books about the first uniformed NVA that was killed in Vietnam, and it was April, May of '65.
So what qualities make a good leader in Vietnam as far as the Marines?
Well, any kind of a leader. The most important thing is probably Chesty Puller, probably some of his things. He knew the boot size of every single one of his men. In the infantry, the most important thing is your feet. And of course your rifle. But, knowing your men and taking care of them. I was surprised at some other outfits, not Marine outfits. I wouldn't mention the Army, the Air Force, or the Navy, but anyway, the Marines, one thing they do, your enlisted men eat first. You let them eat first, and you take what's left over, which was great for me because my first tour, I hated the ham and lima beans, and that's all that was left. One of my men loved the ham and lima beans. He said, "Tell me what you like, sir. I'll get what you like, and we'll trade," because I love those ham and lima beans. But anyway, it's taking care of your people and knowing what you're doing and depending on your sergeants. My sergeants, our first tour, had all served in Korea. And so, you depend on them as far as, their advice and listen to them, They had great stories about, things that they'd done in Korea. And, the worst thing can be is just got you put on a brown bar and that you suddenly think you're God. But those unless staff NCOs and sergeants were great. and we depended on them tons, you know. And of course, the officer makes the final decision, but you know, you listen to your men,
Absolutely.
and then know that, you know, especially ones who've been there and done that, you know, that you take care of them, and you don't just because you've been on the bar doesn't make you a god. And
You brought up an interesting point about the feet. Can you talk a little bit about hygiene in the field?
well, that's it. I mean, your feet are important, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, those having the right size of boot, and you know, make sure that, you know, you always have the corpsman out there with you, and they're taking care of you and making sure that everything's all right. But you know, that's one of Chester Pillar's famous stories, that you know, when your boot gets worn out and Sergeant Jones or Private Jones needs a new pair of boots, you know, or he got messed up somehow in them, that, you know, Chester knew what size of boot he wore. And that's part of taking care of your men.
How long out in the field would you go without a shower?
Well, I was lucky. I didn't have to go out as many.
Oh, okay.
One time I went out for a week. You know, that was the worst for me, because I was mainly in the battalion CP directing things that were going on. I spent a week out on a patrol once, and I got a picture, you can tell it, you know, you know, but I never had to spend that myself, you know. Some guys spent much longer than that.
It seems like in your position you had an enormous responsibility to protect your men with that much artillery. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I wasn't there to much. See, our artillery, we were with the infantry.
Oh.
See, our artillery was a couple of miles away.
But you coordinated it.
We were coordinating, you know. We had, see, the fire mission comes in from the Fort Observer to the FDO, Fire Direction Officer, and then the Fire Direction Officer, we call it, lays the battery or has them set up the battery so that their artillery piece is shooting the right direction. And I want to make sure that we don't have any patrols in the area, that they could be, I know where they're shooting. And so the infantry protected us where we were, you know. That was their job, you know, around the base on. But ours was to make sure. My biggest fear was always that we might shoot our own people, hit our own people, you know, as far as, you know, that was my biggest fear. Or same thing when I flew a gunship, is, you know, afraid to shoot my own people.
Well, friendly fire, it's like a lot of casualties.
Yeah, I mean, we had a short round, 4-deuce mortar, force. A short round, it was just a bad round that landed right in the middle of a platoon, a company commander and all his men, and killed them all. But it was just a short, well, nobody's fault, it was just a bad round.
That's terrible. Did you have R&R during your first tour?
No, because I'd already been there. We'd been there during the Gulf of Tonkin things. It's been 67 days at sea, then 5 days ashore. That's a story. Put 15,000 Marines and sailors ashore after 67 days at sea is another story in itself.
Let's hear that one.
Yeah. At Subic Bay in the Philippines, I tell you, that was, anyway, then we 5 days short, 14 more days at sea, then we went to Okinawa, then we went to Thailand, then we went to Japan, then went to Thailand, and then from Thailand went to Vietnam, so I was only there. See, I was only there my first tour, May, June, July, September, 5 months, and then second tour was just there 19 days before I got shot down. So I had 2 short tours and learned a lot in 2 tours. But
Absolutely.
yeah.
Before we move to your time between tours and your training with the helicopters, was there anything from your first tour that you care to comment on that I haven't asked?
Oh, probably the main thing was coming home and seeing so much the attitude of the people and not knowing. The main thing is not knowing what they were talking about, and things like, nothing just irritated me more than calling our guys baby killers and stuff like that, because I saw cases where Marines risked their lives to, it wasn't unusual for the NVA or aviation to push the women and children out in the street and use them as shields while they escaped down the other end of the street shooting at the Americans, and our Marines wouldn't shoot back at them.
And this was after your first tour, whenever you came back home, you experienced that kind of anti-war?
Well, I saw that, yes. Back in came back in, when did I come back? Came back in 65, flight school. So sort of insulated because I was in flight school from 65 to late 66 and lived on the base, and I knew that stuff was going on, but sort of ignored it, because we were mainly and the women we dated were people around there that weren't into that stuff, and so it was after I came back in 68 is when things really got bad.
Let's talk a little bit about your decisions to go into flight school.
Well, I was supposed to in the first place.
Oh, yeah.
And anyway, while I was in Vietnam, I reapplied for flight school and got accepted. And my orders initially, before I got my clearance to flight school, were to go to Paris Island, which meant I would have been a series officer training new recruits. But I had my car packed. I was getting ready to drive to Cushing to pick up a fraternity brother. He was starting the FBI Academy in Quantico. I was going to drop him off and go down to Paris Island when I got a phone call and said that my order has been changed to go to Pensacola. So instead of going there, I went straight to Pensacola from Oklahoma City, and that was in 65.
Pensacola is quite beautiful. Did you have a chance to go off base?
Oh, yes. I love Pensacola. I almost, it was at Pensacola when I got out. It was either I was going to Oklahoma City, going to come back to Oklahoma City. Didn't have any brothers or sisters, so my parents were here, or Pensacola number 2 or San Francisco number 3. There's a lot of fruits and nuts in San Francisco, but I liked it. But Pensacola, I really loved Pensacola and almost went back there.
Interesting. So during your time training, or before, did you re-enlist at any point?
No, I was a regular officer. I was offered a regular commission out of the PLC program, and so that meant if you're a reserve officer, you serve at the discretion of the president, or you have a 3-year enlistment period. I didn't have an enlistment period. I was a regular officer, so I would have, as a pilot, I would have stayed in.
Okay.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Talk a little bit about the pilot training.
Had a lot of fun. Flew the T-34, which was a fixed engine an airplane. It was a lot of fun. A primary trainer. Then went to the T-28, which was an advanced trainer. And there we got, went into did some aerobatics in the T-34 and T-28. Fully aerobatic, did instrument training, got instrument qualified in it, carrier qualified in the T-28, which was exciting. And then I had selected to go to helicopters. After you go through the T-34, jets or helicopters, because I'd seen the gunships work over in Vietnam, I wanted to fly a gunship, and so I put into helicopters hoping I would get a gunship. So then after the T-28 and carrier quals and all that, we went to can't think of the base where we flew the H-13, the old thing you see on MASH, that's H-13. Then we went to H-34 helicopters, and then there's where, we were picked to go to what they called your RAG squadron, replacement air group, which was I was picked gunships, and so I got picked to go to a gunship squadron in Camp Pendleton, or you either went to H-34 or to H-53s or H-46s, tandem helicopters. And the H-53s were the big, huge single engine transport. And but I lucked out getting what I wanted. It was the gunship, and then after flight school, you go to your RAG squadron, called replacement air group, and mine was in Camp Pendleton, and so I went to Camp Pendleton there.
How were you trained to fly at night? Talk a little bit about instrument flying.
Well, first of all, you fly at night, VFR. You don't fly in instruments when you're first learning how to fly at night. It's, you're flying visually, and, you're using ground. You have the horizon, somewhat in the horizon, and the ground you fly what's called visual flight rules first. Then you go to instruments. Well, see, we got instruments in the T-28. Yeah, and what that is flying. You pull a bag over your head and you're flying on instruments, and the instructor is acting as a ground controller and telling you how you're supposed to, what approach you're making into an airport. Then, so you did some of that in the T-28. So you were familiar with instrument flying, and then they have what do you call them? The practice models. Can't think what that on the ground that are simulating flying in instruments that link trainers, which are simulating. You practice in them doing instrument landings, and then you go to regular airplane and instrument landings, and so that's it's a lot of fun. But the carrier landings is still the most exciting thing.
It seems to be a helicopter in Vietnam. You need incredible psychological endurance. How were you trained psychologically to cope with combat and so many flights per week?
I don't remember anything in particular psychologically.
Okay.
Training about, and like I was there only 19 days my second tour before I got shot down. So
okay.
Yeah, I don't. But part of our squadron's deal was psychological. Was we flew SOG missions, Special Operation Group, secret missions over in Laos because we flew them with the Army Green Berets. And so those were psychologically pretty hairy because you only took only IDs you took were your dog tags and your Geneva Convention card for whatever that's worth. But you took no other IDs with you. If you got shot down and got captured, just figure you were lost. You weren't being recovered. Because I think something like 600 or 800 went down and were captured, and only 8 or 12 came out of Laos, something like that. There were We weren't going to come home, so
How
that
did
was a psychological on your brain.
All right. How did you prepare for that? How did you set your affairs in order?
Pray a lot. No, I mean, you said there, you didn't have anything special for things in order. I'm just, your stuff was there, and whether you got shot down in one of those or another mission, it'd be taken care of. So.
Did you talk with your family during this time, in between tours? Did you ever?
Well, my mom, I'm an only child, and my mom thought my dad could get me, not have to go back with an only child, and Dad told her no. He wasn't going to do that because he knew I wouldn't accept it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, I didn't talk to them about it, I didn't. They knew I was going back, and, just, that was my job, and I knew what I wanted to do. One thing was a little bit different, though. I get very, very, very tied up with these guys nowadays, having to go back 4, 5, 6, 7 times. And my squadron was a new squadron, getting ready to establish a new squadron and go back. And one time the adjutant came over and said, "Captain, there's a major on the phone who wants to talk to you. Major from headquarters, Marine Corps." And I went, okay, so I figured I was in trouble for something. So I said, "Yes, sir." And he says, "Captain, you realize that your 2 years aren't up until September, and you don't have to go back. Your squadron is scheduled to go back in May, but you don't have to go back until September if you don't want to." Because we were guaranteed 2 years home back then. And I said, "Well, I want to go back with my friends and the guys I squared." I said, "I have no problem with it." He says, "You sure about that?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Is anybody put any pressure on you to go back?" I said, "No, sir." I said, "I just want to go back with the guys I trained with." They said, "Okay, fine. This one, Major."
What was your squadron?
VMO3. It was called VMO3. But if I didn't want to, back in May, I could have said, "I don't want to go back until September," and I didn't have to go back if I didn't want to. Which is a whole big different thing than what the guys are going through now with all these multiple deployments and how it wears on them mentally and their family, and it's a tragedy what they're doing today to these young troops that are going back and forth.
So, I guess it takes us back to Vietnam. Can you take us back to your first day back in Vietnam?
That was kind of funny. We got there and we checked in. It was 100 and some degrees, and they were checking in, and they said, "Well, we're going to have a mortar attack tonight. Every time we get new people in, there's going to be a mortar attack." So, and we spent most of the day it was hot, and we just checked in. With nothing to do, so went to the officers club and came back, and we were all in a rack of 8 of us asleep, and the siren goes off. We get up, and one of the guys tripped and fell, hit his head on the floor. "Barclay, you look like a real warrior." I had my helmet on backwards and my skivvies, That's where 8 of us in skivvies, and they said, "Anybody bring a weapon?" Nobody brought a weapon. We were all just... So these 8 warriors and their skivvies, no weapon, and me with the helmet on backwards.
So, among your group that came with you, were you the only one who had been to Vietnam before?
No, we'd all been. They'd all, of the 9 officers had been there as pilots, and I'd been there not as a pilot before.
Did anyone offer you advice as far as being a pilot in Vietnam, or?
No, because all pilots, I would be flying as a co-pilot, start off with everybody, till I get oriented and that type of stuff, and I didn't, the only orientation was the SOG flights, because they told you what would be expected over there, and Laos was secret missions over there, and they were pretty hairy.
Did you fly those missions?
Yeah.
Can you take us through one of those missions?
Well, the first one, it was really funny. They'd wake you up at midnight, and I know I'd be flying co-pilot because my first one. And the co-pilot's job was to pre-flight the helicopter and get ready. And so the air officer came and woke me up at midnight and said, pre-flight 0500 and being there at 600. So I went, got, pre-flight and went over, and saw pilots got anything they wanted to eat, and I ordered me a couple of big steaks and potatoes and eggs and filled my plate up. I figured I get shot down, I'm get shot down with a full tummy. And I go over and sit down from across my pilot I'm flying with, and I'm just shoveling it in. And he says, he's just sort of picking at his food, and I said, "What's the matter?" Now I can read. And he looked at me like an idiot and says, "If you've flown a few of these, you'll find out." And he threw his fork, came back. Anyway, what happened that day was an interesting one. I'd flown some other missions in the South, but this was over in Laos. And what they'd done, they set the Marine helicopters had sent in an Army Special Forces team and about 40 mountain yards into, unbeknownst to them, into NVA regimental headquarters. It was in a big, huge U-shaped area where they were backed up to it, and it was several hundred feet high. And they just got wiped out, sent them in, and all the on the Special Forces and mountain yards were in a B-52 crater. And so they were flying, protecting for them. And anyway, we got up at Quezon about dark, and they were flying A6s, dropping illumination flags, and they were having hand-to-hand combat, grenades in and out during the night, and made the plans and rescue them the next day. And so one thing nobody's ever mentioned over there, and I don't know why, but there was a Vietnamese unit. Their call sign was Bluebird. They flew yellow Marine H-34 helicopters with one pilot, one machine gunner, and their families lived in the helicopters there at Quezon. And when they got a mission, they'd have laundry hanging on the rotors and stuff like that. They got a mission, they'd push out their wife and kids, and they'd hop off and go fly these missions. I've never heard anybody talk about them. But anyway, we got it all set up the next day to get this team out, and we had about 8 gunships. They were here in this B-52 bomb crater, and we were flying in like that around and to fly cover for them. Bluebirds, the Vietnamese, were over here circling when they were ready to come in, supposed to come in. We had all kind of fixed wing planes, jets, and A-1s coming this way doing bombing and strafing. And they had this Air Force Ford air controller who was marking targets, and he was having to stack up the airplanes as they came in because the A-1s and fixed wings had more fuel. They could put them up higher. The jets they'd check, and he was stacking these jets up. And anyway, the Vietnamese right here in this little circle, and finally the RXO was calling in the Bluebirds, and he says, "Okay, Bluebird, this is okay, you're cleared to go in." And this little Vietnamese voice says, "Roger," and they keep going around this circle. And pretty soon he says, "Bluebird, this is okay, you're cleared this little bit in Boyd's voice says, "Okay." He keeps circling. Finally, guys start coming up and saying, "Hey, if they don't go in, I'm gonna go shoot them out of the sky. Get those bastards in," you know. And finally, "Bluebird, did you hear that? If you don't go in, you're gonna get shot out of the sky." "Roger." And so anyway, he comes in, and first one comes in, and these guys hop in, and he picks up and he gets shot down. And normally they scatter like quail when the first one goes, but they kept coming in one after another. Picked them up, and then I had a Marine H-46 come in and pick up these other guys. Anyway, as it came out, we were happened to be the last helicopter. They had to go through it around this big, backed over case on. And one of our crewmen said, somebody down there's running with a marker panel, which marked a landing spot. So we got back to Vietnam, to Quezon, and there was one of the sergeants was missing. That wasn't, they knew he wasn't dead or wounded. And for 5 days they flew out there, looking for him, and they'd see him, and he was going by E&E, escape and evasion, from the NVA. Our guys had seen him, but then the NVA would see that we saw him, and so he was run and hide for 5 days. Finally, on the 5th day, they picked him up, and down at the end of the runway, there was this chapel. And they said that they let him out of the helicopter, and he went straight for that chapel and shut the door. And didn't, I don't know how long he stayed there, but he had to E&E them for 5 days before he got rescued.
Wow. How many helicopters were lost on that particular mission?
Well, I remember a friend of mine, there were H-46s, the Marine tandem helicopter. I remember seeing him hanging in his straps dead. And it was his helicopter. Three, I think. 3 on that operation, and 2 in the rescue. Then 2 A-1s had a mid-air collision. 2 of our planes had a mid-air collision coming out of this. I think only about 5 helicopters I've shot at.
Once back on base, how did you guys cope with such tremendous loss?
Just one of those days. You just have to. The one guy that I saw was hanging in his straps. I went through flight school with, and I just, it's tough, yes. If you know them, it's hard to, especially if you know they're married and have a family and stuff like that. It makes it even tougher.
And you were only there for, you said 17 days?
19 days.
19 days.
Mm-hmm.
During those 19 days, did you have days off?
Yeah, there's a couple of days off.
What did you guys do on days off?
Just stand there, hang around the officers' club. Played AC-doocy, played cards in the radio room, bridge, and stuff like that. Hang around the officers' club.
You hear a lot of gambling in
Yeah,
the
a lot
military.
of gambling. If I'd have stayed a year, I'd come back a millionaire.
Yeah, so you were pretty good at it.
I was way ahead. I was about $600 ahead. If, of course, that might not lasted, but I was way ahead on the poker games. Enjoyed playing it. Yeah.
And as an officer, did you have your choice of drink? Or did you drink during that time?
I drank, but it was just, it's what it had, the officers club, it's like any bar.
Right.
Yeah, I don't remember what they weren't very expensive, but, just, if you were going to fly, you didn't drink very much, if you're going to fly the next day or something, just, you know, the air conditioner thing was we had fans, but their office stuff was air conditioned. So it's a good place to spend your time, you know.
How many crew members was on your helicopter?
4 of us, 2 gunners and 2 pilots.
Were they 50 cal gunners?
No, we had M60s.
Oh.
We didn't have the Army's. Our gunships were smaller. We were Echo models, and they had a bigger helicopter than we did, and they had the big. No, they didn't have 50 calibers, but they had the big throughout the grenade type rocket launchers. We had rockets. We had 2.75 rockets on ours. We had 16, but they had more rockets on theirs because they had a bigger engine.
And this is a Huey, right? So
Yeah,
this is fire supportive.
Yeah. We were the, going to support form before the jets went in. Generally, if the jets couldn't get in.
Any time between your first and your 17th mission, 19th mission, the 19th day that you want to talk about before we get to June 8th?
Well, that one is interesting, and we had, what's interesting, they had One-Shot Charlie in Fubai. Every time an airplane or helicopter came in into Fubai, there was a guy at the end of the runway that would shoot 1 round. And the thing about it was, the story was, well, why don't you go get him? He says, if we get him, all he's doing is doing his job. When somebody comes in, he shoots a round at him, and he misses. If we go ahead, they'll get somebody, they'll replace him. They'll hit him. The guy's not trying to hit anybody. He shoots his round there for a few airplanes, and somebody takes his place, and he goes back to mama, and everybody's happy, you know. So they just called him One-Shot Charlie. Every time a plane or helicopter came in, you could hear 1 round, and all the new guys would say, "Why don't you go get him? They'll replace him with somebody that can shoot." So anyway,
That's a pragmatic choice.
Yeah.
I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about the Bluebirds. Bluebirds, right? That's what you were talking about?
The Vietnamese.
Yeah.
That was one time I was around.
Oh, okay.
They lived at Khe Sanh. They lived on the helicopters. They had their families there. They cooked outside the helicopter, next to the helicopter. And they'd have laundry hanging on the rotors.
Did you ever talk to them?
I never got a chance to talk to them, you know. I mean, to say, hi to them, and that was it, you know. But they really, I never, wasn't there long enough to know anybody. I didn't even get there long enough to know my squadron.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, take us through the events of June 8th.
Well, we always kept 2 gunships up there at Khe Sanh. We always had 2 of them up there to support whatever was going up there because it was hot up there. It was for the invasion, but it was pretty hot up there. We had flown up there to go over to Laos for a mission over there. And they had that company get hit that day, and so they diverted us all day long. We were just flying support for that infantry company. And the sequence was, you come back, the pilots rearm the rockets, the crewmen rearm the machine guns and regas, and we hop in and take off. And that was procedure, you know. And so, and you were in a hurry to get in the air because these guys were getting shot at on the ground. And one of the pilots who was assigned there got in a hurry to take off. And he got crossway in the wind, and he rolled the helicopter up on the tarmac. Didn't hurt anybody, but crashed on the tarmac. So they signed us to stay there, and so we stayed there. And they that morning we flew what we call a recon insert over in Laos as the Marines. Insert we flew where we had 2 gunships, 2 H-46s, and 2 Marine F-8s flying cover. And we finally located where they went to set down, and so we went down on each side of him as he went in, and as he sat down to let the Marine outfit off. I was really good at reading maps because I'd been in the artillery. We'd flown around a bunch, nobody could find the right location, and finally I told the pilot I was flying with, I said, "Tell them to follow us, I'll show you where we're supposed to go." And I said, down there, pointed on the ground. Laos, to me, was like the moon with trees. Just no paths, nothing you could tell, no roads. And so I said, that's where they are. There's where you want them to be. And so set them down, and that H-40 sat down, and they opened up on him, and he said, "Jesus Christ, my instrument panel looks like a Christmas tree." We said, "Can you get off?" "Well, try." So he lifted off, and then after he lifted off and got out of there, everybody was fine. The jets went in and wiped it out. And so we went back to that day they had the first hot meal at Quezon. It was weenies and sauerkraut. And at noon I ate all I could eat because I might get we went back, and the clouds were coming in. We didn't think we were going to fly, and their officer came by and he said, "Would you guys try getting there?" I said that the clouds are too low for jets, but maybe y'all give some air support. We said, okay. So there's 4 crews of us walking out there, helicopters, and 2 crews, 4 pilots and 4 gunners. And we're walking out there. What sort of set our tempo was, we walked by the morgue, and they had about 14 body bags laying out there from the day before that they're getting ready to ship out, and that sort of sobered us up because we've been laughing and joking. And anyway, we got in the air and we checked in with the company commander, and he asked us to check out to the north and west of him, and we said yeah. And so he popped smoke to show where his men were, and we were zicking around, flying, looking, and Dave, I was flying with, said, "I think I saw something along that tree line, let's make a gun run." And we told our section leader what we're going to do, and they followed us down, and so we made mine to have a machine gun. I shot, pulled up, came back around, and he said, "Let's look at this, check it out." And as he's pulling up, they opened up on us, and the first round got the engine, and the siren goes off, and the light flashes, and needles go to 0. And so we started, we were talking to the ground on FM, I flew up over to UHF, and we started calling Mayday, and I stuck out my hands, and next burst came through the cockpit and hit me in the hand, and I blew up, and I didn't see anything except blood and bone, and I said, "I'm hit." I reached over here to grab this pressure point, and he said, very matter of fact, says, "I'm dead, I'm dead." And I looked at him, I thought he was panicking. I looked at him, telling him to fly this, I can't. And he was hanging these straps like that. So anyhow, you know anything about a helicopter?
A little bit.
If you're taking off in a helicopter, you got to just you practice all the time doing auto rotation and disengage the rotor from the engine,
Mm-hmm.
When you lose your engine, you got to get that down to disengage it. Well, I had no other choice except to use my stub, and all stuff's going through your head, Well, normally you would look for a clearing to take it in, but I couldn't do a normal auto rotation. A normal auto rotation, you come flare and pop the collective and set it down. I knew I had to take it into the trees, and I wanted to be going straight down. I didn't want to cartwheel, and so when I was looking for a place to take it, I pushing with my stub down as much as I could. And I got down as far as I could and was holding it down with my knee. And I got us going straight down into some trees, and we started going to trees. I bounced, hit bounce, and rolled over on my side. And I laid there for a minute, and I said, I'm going to wake up a minute. This is going to be over with. But I smelled smoke, and I said, oh my God, we're on fire. So I climbed out the cruise compartment, and they were, 2 gunners were squatted on the ground. I thought we'd been captured, and I looked at him and said, get a tourniquet and put on my arm. So the crew chief went over and got their tail rotor tied down and made a tourniquet, and then the other one said, they're shooting at us, sir. And they were shooting at us, and they were shooting at the other helicopter. He was shooting at them. And so we went over and got some cover, and the helicopter was laying like that, and he was hanging his straps, and I said, yeah, it was burning, and I didn't want him to burn. I said, we got to get him out of there. And so I stood up to go back to the helicopter. I was going to use my survival knife to cut through the canopy, and then I just fell flat on my face, and I says, oh God, my leg's broken. And they said, sir, he's dead. And I says, well, tell him to get an H-46 with a hoist, and my leg's broken, and I tried talking on the radio, and I couldn't. My ears were ringing, and remember my nose was numb for some reason. And I gave it to the crew chief, and I said, tell him to get a 46. There's a hoist. With a hoist, my leg's broken, and my arm shot off. And they talked a little bit, and they said, we don't have any 46s in the area. We got to get up top of the mountain. So the 2 gunners grabbed me, each by the shoulder, on their hands and knees, because the mountain was too steep. And they were on their hands and knees. They were daisy chaining me up, and I was pushing with my good leg, and I felt something pulling over here on my arm. I looked down, I didn't know, but my hand was hanging on by about 1 inch of thin skin, and it was getting tangled in the shrubs. And I untangled it, and the blood, my tourniquet had come off, and the blood had stopped. And so I put it up like that, and up there, and so with my other leg, I pushed and pulled and tugged. And I forgot to tell you the other part. Anyway, we got up to the top of the mountain, and the crew chief from the H-34 came to pick me up like a baby, ran through me on the helicopter, and as we came up, I knew what had got us. We were flying right over it again. I says, oh God, we're going to get hit again. Nothing happened. We got back to Caisson, and well, one of them, corpsman, was working on my leg. The doctor lifted up my arm, and I felt him go clip, and I said, you can't save it. And he said, no. By the time the other pilot came in and says, what was it? I said, he said, how's Dave? And I said, he was dead before we hit the ground. I said, what was it got us? He says, a quad 50. I said, I saw him get you, and I salvoed my rockets on it. But the story is that I missed, I didn't tell you earlier, that first night when we were flying, there's a spiritual part to this too. Because I laid there that first night, and I was scared. I started getting scared, and I was starting. And I started praying, and this was, that first tour, that first SOG mission. And I started praying, and my prayer was not that I wouldn't die. I didn't want to let anybody down. I wanted to do my job anyway. And in that hooch, there was 8 of us, and a white light literally came in that hooch and said, it was as if somebody said, inside of me, says, never fear, I'll be with you. And my fear just flowed out of me and went away, and then I went to sleep and woke up next morning. The key to that part of it is that the whole time we were on the ground and going through that, I was never scared, because the Lord had assured me that 2 or 3 weeks earlier that everything was going to be all right, and I was not scared at all during that. when they were shooting at us from the air and on the ground and dragging up the hill and all that stuff. I was never scared at all.
Wow. Tell us about the adrenaline kicking in. And
What?
Did you feel the pain? Was adrenaline overrunning you at this point?
You know, you don't think, I mean, all I knew, my hand was gone. It was like somebody hit me in the hand with a baseball bat when they hit me, you know. But, you know, and you're not thinking about that. I got to get the helicopter down. I got to get that collective down. You know, I've got to, you know, it's a training. There's where your training comes in, is that, you know, they don't teach you how to do it without a hand, but I knew I had to get that collective down to disengage that rotor. So if it didn't, we'd fall like a rock. And then I wanted to be going straight down, so that when we hit the trees, we wouldn't cartwheel. I wanted to go through the trees level, and then when I wanted to be near a clearing, I got us near a clearing, so then we rolled into the clearing. But then that was 47 years ago, and I'm still living stories about it because I'll tell you the bad parts too. The good part was it got me back to my base at Fubai, and one of the guys pilot Pete Hyman, standing foot of my bed, and my nickname was Bo, and he said, "Bo, can I get you something?" I said, "Man, I'd love a Coke. I made a Coke with ice, you know." And this was in a full leg cast and pipe tubes in me. Anything, he went and got me a Coke out of a machine. And when he propped me up on my elbow and started drinking it, it was hot. As it came down, I felt it go down, and it was going to bounce around. I felt it bouncing around my weenies, and all I did was turn my head like that, and weenies and sauerkraut went all over this kid, this poor Marine.
Wow.
And I'm saying, "Hey man, I'm sorry," and I don't know how you knew I was officer. He's wiping weenies and sauerkraut off them. I'm sorry.
What were the names of the two men who pulled you out?
Corporal Lanham and Lance Corporal Alexander. And the other pilot was first it's David Myers. So anyway, I go to sleep. Well, the CO came by with some guys. I was asleep, and this thing goes on forever. I'm laying there like a MASH, where the 8 beds, and right by the door. I'm sort of laying on my right side, and somebody's waking me up, shaking me. And I look up, and it's the one guy in the squadron I couldn't stand. He was a Naval Academy grad, and he was an asshole. And he's waking me up and says, "Why'd you leave Dave behind? Marines don't leave their buddies behind." And I'm trying to focus, and I said, "Why are you saying this to me, And he's saying, shaking me. And all I can think of is, "Why are you doing this to me?" And so I yelled at him. I said, "Why are you doing this to me?" And I rolled over and tried to hit him. And he ran out the back door. Well, that put a big, it's bad enough. You don't leave your buddies behind, but that planted in my mind a deal. Anyway, about 3 years later, David Myers, who I was flying with, Larry Wirt, who I went through flight school with and lived with in Pensacola, he and David had gone to high school together and college together. They were from State College, Pennsylvania, and they both got to Penn State. And one of the two, I talked the other one going into the flight school, I don't remember who. But Larry came by about 3 years later, and he said, he didn't know the whole story, and I told him the story. And I said, I have not gone and talked to his parents. He was married, he didn't have any children. I said, I'll go to State College tomorrow to tell them the story if they want to hear it. reason I haven't told them, I don't know what the Marine Corps told them. Nobody's told me what the Marine Corps told them. So their parents were friends. Larry and David's parents were friends. So Larry said he talked to his parents. He calls me back a couple weeks later and says his mother says not to say anything because it'll just bring up old wounds for David's mother. So I didn't. Now we fast forward from that point about 10 years, and they're having his 40th high school reunion. And I get hooked up with his classmates. He was the only one his class killed in Vietnam. And his brother calls me. And they've invited me to come to his 40th high school reunion and tell the story. And so I tell his brother, I say, do you want to hear the facts? I'll tell you the facts, yeah. So, as a matter of fact, his brother paid for my flight out to State College for a 40th high school reunion. His brother lives in a Norman Rockwell farm. You know, house was built in 1860. You know, just beautiful place, you know. And so somebody decides this big deal, the big reunion. They invite his ex-wife who's remarried and this asshole who, this guy who had harassed me that night. Everybody had heard about it. So they figure if we meet that, you know, we can work things out. Two of my good buddies come to the thing to back me up, and his brother has this big reception. Well, the thing about it was, I did a good job telling the story, except my wife and I decided that our children, both our dads were Robert W. So if we had a boy, he was going to be Robert W. We had a boy, he was Robert W. If the second was a boy, it was going to be called David Myers Barclay, after David. Well, my daughter got old enough, she asked me to understand it all. She says, why didn't you call me Emily Myers Barclay? You know, be part of it. I'm telling this whole story, and I go through the whole thing. And I get to the story about Emily wanting to be called Emily Myers Barclay, and I just lost it, you know. I just, you know, in front of 300 people, I lost it. Anyway, from there we go to his farm for this reception. And so they set up a deal, he and I can get off the side together. And I'm telling, and he starts off in this crap about David and he were best friends, and he wanted to know what, he had to know what happened to David, and all this BS. And I said, you're a lying son of a bitch. He says, you didn't have to come to me. Both the crewmen survived. They had a debriefing. You could listen to the debriefing. You didn't have to come and hassle me because my leg was broken, my hand was shot off for leaving Dave behind, or put that guilt trip on me. And then I said some nasty words to him and told him to get out of there. I didn't want to see him anymore. And he went away. And the thing about that was that part of that, my wife had some psychological problems before that, and when I went to her psychologist in support of her, I told her that story about him coming. I said, she said, have you ever told anybody that? It had been 22 years when I told her that story about what he did, and she said, have you ever told anybody that? And I said, no, I never told anybody that. She said, how often do you think about it? I said, every day. And every day I thought about that. And I still think. Now, what I'm going through is they relocated the helicopter. And I've always said I never wanted to go back, but his brother has been going to these DNA meetings and these POW meetings forever. And they've located it finally. There's a doctor trying to locate the helicopter. Finally, his brother said, "Why don't you talk to the guy that was there? Maybe he'll tell you." They had attached to some Army unit somewhere. I mean, so I got with this lieutenant colonel a couple of years ago and told him where it was. Anyway, I've always said I never wanted to go back, but I feel I owe it to his family to go back.
You mentioned that your wife saw a psychologist. Did you ever seek counseling or anything?
No, yeah, I've been doing that. I never really did. The story is my wife decided to divorce me. Well, she filed after 43 years. It was final after 45, and I've been going through. I went through PTSD. They have triggers for PTSD. And when she filed for divorce, it went crazy. I mean, I spent 6 days in the psych ward at the VA hospital, and I'm still going and getting help for it. My psychiatrist thinks it'll be good for me. And what his brother said, that he said, if I find a tooth, I'll bring it home and bury it.
How long after you got back stateside did you start talking about this with other people within the first couple of years, or did you?
I didn't mind talking about it at all at first, because I felt so lucky to be alive, and I felt that there was a reason. I felt God had a reason for me, that He wanted me to be alive. His brother, he told me, he says, they were coming home from his high school graduation. And the Marines were sitting on the front porch waiting for him. So I've never really had a closure on the thing, as far as, and they can't go back. Evidently, they've got 200 sites all over the country, the world, I guess, that you have to go, the guys are in charge of each side have to make a presentation to CPAC to convince them to go back to excavate. And I guess because his body was never recovered, that they're going to let him go back. And so, but his brother told me, he said that the day his mother died, she thought one day he would walk in that door. And that's why I feel like I should have gone. But Larry's parents said not to, so I didn't.
So he was considered MIA.
MIA, and then they were KIA. It just took a few days before they declared him KIA because of what the crew said and what I said, because last thing he said was, he says, I'm dead. And I looked over and he was slumped over in his seat, so. We can go back, and next year they've got us scheduled to go back in 2015, and so I guess I'll go back, and I just feel like I owe it to them.
I understand. How long were you in the hospital before you were released?
4 months.
4 months.
Mm-hmm.
And this is 1968, right?
67.
67.
June, July, August, September, October. Yeah.
How long did it take you to adjust to your new physical shape?
As far as my problem is, my leg at the time was giving me more pain than my arm was. The ankle was broken and the heel bone was broken, and my heel bone still gives me a problem. I step on it wrong and fall down or whatever. But it was VA's changed because back then I was having real trouble with my ankle. I'd step out of a car and just fall down like a drunk. So I went to the VA hospital, and this young guy, back then about my age, an intern, he puts my x-rays up on the board, and he starts laughing. I said, "See that?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Ha ha ha." I said, that's a floating chip. Ha ha ha. I said, "That's fine. You got two choices. You can, number one, we can operate and freeze your ankle for life, or you grin and bear it." Ha ha ha. I almost decked him. I stood up and I said, "I'm out." That was 1970. I said, "I'm out of here. I ain't coming back." And I didn't go back till 1999 because he thought it was cute. It was funny that, ha ha ha, you can grin or bear it, or we can operate and freeze your ankle for life.
It's very disrespectful.
Things have changed over there. The things are tough in a lot of places, but Oklahoma City Hospital isn't that all that bad as far as I'm concerned.
So whenever you were reintegrated back into society, a lot had changed physically, psychologically. What had changed politically? Did your views change politically, or?
No, I'm just bitter. Jane Fonda and John Kerry. I don't know if you've seen that. You probably haven't seen it, but he was on Meet the Press. I don't know if you've seen a replay of that, of him on Meet the Press.
I'm aware of it.
And he accused us of atrocities in Vietnam, and I never saw an atrocity. I saw, like that. One morning I was walking out to the line shack, and two of our choppers were taking off, and all of a sudden, it must have been some trigger-happy NBA. 10 o'clock in the morning, shoots our helicopter, one of the helicopters. I don't know who's in it, but anyway, we started sending the infantry over to it and everything. And they pushed the women and children out in the middle of the street, and they're shooting at our guys, Marines, through the women and children. And our Marines won't shoot back. And they're running and hiding, they're running to get away, and our Marines won't shoot back at them because they don't want to hit the women and children. See, and stuff like that. And so, the things that I don't mind if somebody objects to something, if they tell the truth, though. That's what bothers me more than anything was, like I said, the news media trying to create the news instead of report the facts that were happening there. That's what, bugs me more than anything.
Did you continue to associate yourself with the military?
Oh yeah, I got involved. I mean, right now, I don't want to make hers. I've been working for 20 years. Today, currently, I don't know if you know this or not, 1% of our population is protecting 99%. Are you aware of that?
Mm-hmm.
And people, they don't have to worry about it if they're part of that 99%. And these young, last I heard, it's been about a year ago, I got to find out, there were 24 triple amputees, and there were 2 quadruple amputees. And that's the last I heard. Well, now they haven't been as nearly as many wounded in the 10 years here as there were in Vietnam. And because there are more amputees nowadays, they're getting them back, saving their lives. When I was in the hospital, all Navy and Marine Corps amputees went to 2 hospitals. They went to Oak Knoll in California or Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The whole time I was in the hospital, I only saw one triple amputee. He was a Navy corpsman, missing 2 legs, an arm, and an eye. But, you know, these kids nowadays, young people, I keep making on them kids because, you know, they're coming back today, you know, and if there's so many people that are disassociated, and right now, I don't know if you know this, but right now they are sending letters, RIF letters, or termination letters to the troops or they're in Afghanistan, telling them when they get home they won't have a job.
I didn't know that, no.
They know, get this. You're in Afghanistan, you're fighting to stay alive mainly, and you get a letter from your government that says, if you don't get killed, come home and you don't have a job. That is what this administration and Hagel is doing to these kids, young people. I hate to call them kids, you know. How old are you?
I'm 28.
Well, you're a kid compared, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you have a lot of them over there your age. I was 27 when I got wounded, all right? But, you know, they're literally, that's a fact. That's not a rumor. That they're letting them know, and it's mainly in the Army captain ranks. It's something like I think it's 7,000, don't hold me to this, 7,000 Army captains, some of them over there, some of them here, are being told that because they're riffing their Army by 70,000. And these are people that have been trained, been in 6, 8, 10 years, and they're being told, you know, if you come home, you no longer have a job. If you die, we'll give your family return $50,000.
You mentioned a highly problematic problem with employment, and especially with Vietnam. Vietnam employment rates were skyrocketing, and along with inflation during the time. What did you do for employment after you got outside of the military, being a disabled veteran?
In first place, I went to the FAA. This young gal treated me like crap. I figured being a pilot and be FAA would be the place for me to go. And I didn't, you know. I was talking about I get points from military, I get extra points for disability, da-da-da-da. And she acted like she could care less. And it pissed me off. And I said, I'm not going to get a job somewhere where I have to depend on somebody else. So this girl I was dating at the time introduced me to her insurance agent, and I went in the insurance business because I thought that a natural place to be would be the FAA, doing something, you know. And then all this other crap that was going on that, you know, was going on because I would get into, because that articles and all the papers and then a couple other articles about me, I would be at a party, and while I was at one party, I had a drink and had a date, and I wanted to get us a drink. It was a cocktail party, and as I was walking back from my drinks with my date, this guy came out of the side, and he said, "You deserve losing your hand for what you did over there." I just met him, I don't know what he knew how to did. I went back to my date and I said, "You know what that guy said?" And she was going to punch his lights out, and I says, "Don't worry about it." And but I would be at a party, and because of what I'd been speaking to in groups like that, and somebody across the room would make a smart aleck remark, and I said, finally I got fed up. I said, "Hey, I imagine you're saying that for my benefit, right? Number one, you don't know what you're talking about. So, number two, I'll challenge you to debate. You name the time and place. I'll debate you about what you just said, But you bring the facts, I'll bring facts. Unless you can bring facts, either put up or shut up. And never had any problem after that. But you know, people talking about something they didn't know about. And so anyway, I studied, learned the history, and learned a lot about the country. And I can't speak to that level about what's going on there with the Shiites and the Kurds and all that stuff. I can't talk like that, but I can about the history of what happened over there. But I used to, you know, make a lot of this, and it's not popular anymore. But you know, just make a lot of speeches at schools and places like that, and you know, try to square people away about the fact. I'll give you a little trivia. You ever hear about the South Korean Marines?
Did. They were elemental in the Vietnam War.
You ever
2
hear
battalions,
about,
right?
Huh?
2 battalions, right?
Did you hear about any big battles they were in?
I can't think of one at the time. No.
There weren't any. You know why?
Why is that?
A friend of mine was a Marine advisor to him. He said, first combat they got into over there, they captured the North Vietnamese captured a South Korean and decapitated him and stuck his head on a pole. The South Koreans went back to that whole town, and every man they caught, they decapitated them, stuck their head on poles and said, "We're not Americans." And they left. He said, I could drive my Jeep at night with the lights on. I didn't have to worry about them because they weren't going to mess with the South Koreans.
You mentioned a lot of problems with civilians upon your reintegration. Did you have problems relating to civilians who had not been in Vietnam?
Some extent, yeah. I didn't waste time with them. I didn't waste time with idiots. You know, if somebody wanted to have a serious discussion about it, but there were people that had no idea what they were talking about. You know, one friend of mine. I'll tell you something happened just the other day, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, about a month ago, I guess, in D.C. We had a Purple Heart meeting, our national officers in D.C., and we're in the hotel. We always have a Purple Heart shirt on. There was a family there. We found out that they were burying their father, who had been President Roosevelt's, in the Navy, President Roosevelt's honor guard, anyway. And they were burying him, and they were all there, and they brought their own bunch of their own food. This lady comes up to us about my age, and all of us are sitting at this table of Vietnam veterans. She says, I want to tell y'all something. I apologize for what I did during the war. She says, and her tears were in her eyes, and she said, what I did was wrong. My dad tried to tell me I was wrong. And I don't know, but I got caught up in all the end of war stuff. And she says, I want to apologize to you men for what I did. And, that was, another friend told me that he was 4F because in high school he'd hurt his leg and had a big scar on it. That's the greatest place for sex was go get one of those utility jackets, Army fatigue jackets, put medals on it, and go to anti-war demonstration. And then I'd show him my leg where I was wounded, and the greatest place to have sex was at an anti-war demonstration, meeting girls.
Have you been to the Vietnam Memorial in Washington? What were your impressions of that the first time you went?
First time was right, second time was right, third time I got sick and tired of these long-haired guys with jackets on. Welcome back, brother. And I'm just turned me off. I don't need some guy with long hair and not even sure that he was there, coming over and welcome me back. Welcome back, brother, and give me a hug. I don't need anybody to welcome me back. Right now, people need to be welcome back, or these guys coming back now, and it really pissed me off. It just, I don't need that. Yeah.
How do you memorialize personally?
How do I memorialize person?
Yeah, for the men that you knew in Vietnam that didn't make
Well, I
it.
do. I think about them, and I just not much I can do as far as defend. All I can do is if somebody comes up with some stupid statement, they don't know what they're talking about. I say, hey, you don't know what you're talking about. If you want to discuss it, I'll discuss it, but that's your wrong. And like other guys that I know that died, as far as their names are on the wall. I'm very close to David because, we were in the helicopter together and that thing about I'm dead, and, other guys died who were detached from me. They weren't that close to me,
Mm-hmm.
And one of my friends kicked a hand grenade, and he was, you look back on the guys, one of them he just signed a contract with either Navy Times or Stars and Stripes as an artist. He was a great artist, and he was in Vietnam, but he signed a contract to do cartoons for him. Another guy went to Boston College and ran track there. And when he got out of the Marines, he wanted to go back and teach French in college, There's guys like that that were, had, special people, and as he talked about, when he got out of the Marines, he's going back and teach French on the college level, I don't know why anybody wants to teach French at college level, but anyway. But, the artist, and one of my good friends, and then the guys that are screwed up, I have a friend that's in the Boston Mafia. The Irish Mafia. He's got 4 Purple Hearts. First Purple Heart was before his high school class graduated. And he has a daughter who just graduated from Naval Academy. But he's so screwed up in the head from four Purple Hearts, and those type of guys. He won't allow TV in his house. He's got 4 kids. He won't allow TV in his house. He won't fly. Doesn't own a car. But he's in the mafia, Irish Mafia.
Do you maintain communication or contact with the 2 who saved your life, who pulled you from the wreckage?
The one crew chief, I'd lost track of him, and one day I was at the office, this was 1999, my wife called me and said, you're not going to believe who you got a phone call from. I said, who? He left on the recorder, your crew chief called. And I had been 33 years. Called him, we met in D.C. I was going to D.C., living in West Virginia. He drove up with his dad. Sister and brother-in-law lived there. And he had never filed, when we got shot down, he had lost partial sight of his eye. One of his eyes, never filed a claim. We got a service officer, and he got 30%. We were working on 40%. And he died in a heart attack watching TV one night. And Alexander, I have no idea. I've lost him totally. I've looked up him. I don't know where he is. And
what was his first name?
His first last name was Lance Corporal.
Lance Corporal. Okay.
I know his name.
And you mentioned family, your wife and your kids. Did your military service have any effect on your family life at all?
I can't. Well, see, I was single when that happened. I got married afterwards. It didn't bother my wife at all, my kids. Yeah, my daughter, I told you she went to Vietnam.
Right.
She's in the movie business,
Mm-hmm.
and she's working on some projects now about it. And son, he was supposed to get in the Marines. It's a long story, but you remember Rhodes College over in Memphis?
Mm-hmm. I've heard of it.
It's they were supposed to start Naval ROTC there, Marine Corps option his freshman year, and they didn't. So he didn't get to be a Marine, but he's they're involved in that kind of stuff, and they understand it. And, my wife didn't understand a lot of it, so she decides after 45 years to trade me on a new younger bottle.
It seems that throughout your life you've made it a point to educating people about Vietnam and to helping other veterans reintegrate. What advice would you give to society or the government into aiding the veterans coming back today?
Well, the thing about it, guys come back to see where they're screwing them up so bad today is these multiple deployments. I mean, they're having so much more PTSD today because the guys don't understand about that are running it. I guess generals should, but the civilians don't. Hagel has got to be an idiot. They've got to do something about these multiple deployments, the suicides. The suicides and the disruption of the family life.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, are you married?
Yeah, I am.
Okay. All right. You have children?
I have a daughter,
How old is she?
about to be 1 year old in August.
Anyway, I mean, imagine what it'd be like. You're sitting here today and suddenly they come and say, hey, Jason, you got to go leave in 2 weeks to go to Afghanistan. How long am I going to be there? I don't know. You come home and you're here a month and they say, hey, you're going to go again to Iraq or even Korea or somewhere. I mean, there's somebody, they are, to me, and I deal with these people, on a regular basis, and simple things like, all right, people don't understand integrating women into the combat arms, talking to a guy in our Purple Heart chapter here that was on a patrol in Afghanistan with a woman. She gave out. Just that, pooped out. They had to disrupt the patrol and to take everybody back because she pooped out. She didn't have the stamina. I mean, there's exceptions to everything, But another thing is, last year, the National Guard killed had a 19-year-old mother that was killed in Iraq or Afghanistan. Now, why do we send 19-year-old mothers into combat? Maybe they want to serve. But see, the women's liberal groups love that. They love to have a 19-year-old mother die because she's paid the price for her country. Why send a 19-year-old mother to war to die? I mean, some of these things just make no sense at all. I mean, maybe a 19-year-old father may go, but there's a difference between your daughter and your mother and your daughter and you at 1 year old. All right, if your wife were killed right now in anything, car wreck, your daughter does no longer have a mother. To all those nurturing things that mothers do. I mean, you can't do, and I couldn't do the things my wife did as a mother. You know, so why do we send a 19-year-old mother into combat to die?
It's a terrible consequence.
Yeah, I mean, it's bad enough losing a father. You know, I've seen, the fathers that have died, you know. I'll tell you a funny story. All amputees have to go talk to a psychiatrist, you know, and I went in to see my psychiatrist, and we were shooting the bull, and you're adjusted, okay? And he said, yeah. Then he started telling me about this 19-year-old Marine that he came in just totally despondent, he just, couldn't get it out of him, and finally he says, come on, break loose, what is it? He says, I can't ever get married. He says, why can't you get married? Because I don't want to have one-legged children. He thought because he lost his leg, his children would be one-legged. And the psychiatrist got to explain it to him that no, you won't have anything to do with having one-legged children.
Wow.
I mean, he said he hopped out there on his one leg, happy, you know.
Wow.
And, but there's so many things that, if women want to serve, let them serve somewhere. Something, I'll tell you a story nobody knows too. Remember when USS Cole got bombed?
Mm-hmm.
You know who panicked more than anybody? The women sailors, because their boyfriends and fiancés were down on the mess deck eating, and a bunch of them were engaged to the guys that were eating or their boyfriend, and the whole group of the female sailors became ineffective because they were panicked about their loved one down below in the mess deck that were eating, that were killed or wounded.
It's terrible.
See, that's the things people don't, those are things that people don't think about, though.
What advice would you give someone who is joining the military today?
Don't. I never thought I'd say that. Really, honestly, I was proud of my son. He got the scholarship and everything. He was going to be a Marine Corps officer. And he, I was very proud. He did it on his own, without telling me. And he got qualified. Until the day he was going down for an interview, and I went down with him, and he got the scholarship. My grandson, I've never ever said a word about him, but he wants to be a Marine. But under the leadership we have now, and what they're doing to these guys, I talked to career officers, lieutenant colonels, commanders. They're not encouraging their sons. Their sons don't go in under the way they're being treated now. Have you ever heard, let me tell you about our rules of engagement. We had that. All right, I flew gunships, okay. All right. You take choir. This is one of the, we had to take an open book test on this. You take fire from a, quote, friendly village. If you take fire, how can it be friendly? Okay. And they say, what do you do? And you identify where the fire came from. What do you do? What would you think you would do?
Fire back.
Done. Circle out of range. Wherever that is. Contact the Vietnamese, circle out of range. Contact the Vietnamese liaison officer, who will then contact, circle out of range, contact your squadron. The squadron will contact the Vietnamese liaison officer. The Vietnamese liaison officer will contact the province or city chief, who will then contact the liaison officer, who will then contact squadron, who will then contact you for permission to fire.
Doesn't seem a very efficient process.
I've seen it in Fallujah, Remember the big battlefield? What's the Fallujah? Anyway, the Marines were going through a cemetery, and they showed on TV. They showed the Taliban or whoever the bad guys had set up a mortar right next to this mosque, and were lobbing mortar rounds at the Marines, but the Marines couldn't shoot back because they couldn't shoot at that mosque.
It's a very difficult situation to fight combat in.
And so until they change the attitude, and this thing about, today, knowing that there's guys your age there now that are probably captains, 27, I was 27 when I was a captain, your age, that are getting notifications from the Army that when they get home, if they're not killed, don't say that, doesn't say that, but they will no longer have a job. And they were a volunteer, they didn't get drafted. That's one thing I do when I make speeches nowadays. I always end up telling people about 1% is protecting us today, and they are 100% volunteers. We've never had a volunteer army before. So when you see one of those guys that's serving, or gals, go thank them, because that's 1% of our population is volunteering to protect us.
So you're from Oklahoma, you went to OSU. What does Oklahoma mean to you?
Well, I came back here because my parents were here, and this is home, it's just a home. I enjoyed loved Pensacola. I hated the fruits and nuts at San Francisco, but I enjoyed the town, the city, and just the cosmopolitan atmosphere of San Francisco. Plus, I had a girlfriend there, too. I had a girlfriend in Pensacola, too. Had one, too, in Oklahoma City. But anyway, just coming back here. Matter of fact, I almost went back to graduate school here, and that's another story. I was accepted by OU, but turned down by OSU.
Interesting. Before I ask my final wrap-up questions, is there anything throughout this interview that you wanted to talk about that I haven't asked?
I think you've very well covered it all. I can't think of anything.
It's very comprehensive.
Yeah.
I like to ask this question to veterans because often war brings out both the best and the good of man. In your personal experiments, what are the best and the worst facets of humanity?
A man, period. Well, I tell you, the American ethic of just caring for other people sincerely. I mean, there's been bad instances. Americans have done bad things, but when I see a guy, well, like those two Marines, they dragged me up the side of a mountain on their hands and knees. That teamwork, or them with a baby in their arms, trying to help a baby and get a baby out of a way of somebody shooting, and that type of thing, I just, compared to the barbarians, like these Taliban, they shot that little girl in the head because she wanted to read, that type of person, and our people are doing everything they can to help. Maybe we're not. Somebody once said, wasn't me, that compared to Utopia, we may be a C+, but compared to the rest of the world, we're an A. Where we have our problems, and I've seen it, bad problems, but I've just seen so many of the, and like I talk about that guy that was a great artist, just signed a contract, one of the forgot who it was, to do articles. And I'm going to go back to college and teach. Guys, guy came back, got his PhD, teaches at Texas. The one triple amputee I saw in the hospital was a 19-year-old Navy corpsman. The kid had the best attitude in the world. I mean, he's sitting there in the therapy and he's laughing about when he gets out, probably the best thing he can be is be a base for a baseball team. And then I go up to at noon, and we're right there at Berkeley at Naval Hospital at noon, and the college students at Berkeley are having a rally with the NVA and Vietnam and Viet Cong flags. They're receiving a plaque, they said came from Ho Chi Minh through Cuba to us, to them, for thanking them for their anti-war efforts. And I'm just thinking about that 19-year-old kid that is missing 2 legs, an arm, and an eye, and strictly they would tell you when you left the hospital, if you're ambulatory, where everybody had a hospital band on, go in groups, because the college students would attack you if they saw your hospital band on you. And it happened more than once, that the college students, if they saw that hospital band on you from, they knew you were from Oak Knoll and you're a wounded veteran, they would visit the students at Oak Knoll, and no matter what these kids had done to save the life of somebody else, and that they had to go in a group to keep from getting ganged on by the students at Southern Cal. And the bad, there's, I don't know, I've read the Quran, and, to be honest with you, it's like watching paint dry to me. As far as I didn't get much out of it. It takes somebody to but what I did get out of it, it ain't good. It's what they want for the rest of the world compared to what we want for the rest of the world. And I cannot speak as an expert in the Quran, but it's hard to understand. But at least Sun Tzu, who Sun Tzu is, he has a great thing about know your enemy, and so that's a big deal. Is that's why I read their stupid book, and I didn't get much out of it.
Whenever history is recorded, what would you like it to say about you? How would you want to be remembered?
I should have got the Medal of Honors. No.
You did get a Silver Star, right?
No, just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'll tell you a sad story about that sometime. One of my Barclayism is that I made up many years ago. Only 2 people ever walked on water, and one of them fell in. None of us are perfect, and made a lot of mistakes, but tried to do what's best for me, my family, my country, and my friends, and that type of thing. I guess that's it, but have you ever heard the name Billy Walkabout? You go to Oklahoma City much?
Not often.
I didn't even know it was there. There's a part of the new highway there in Oklahoma City is the Billy Walkabout Highway, or part of it's called Billy Walkabout there. I didn't know it was there. Billy Walkabout was American Indian from here, two of the guys in our Purple Heart chapter went to high school with him at Grant. He got the Distinguished Service Cross. And if you'd read his Distinguished Cross, it was on display at the 45th Division, but if you'd read it, you'd say he deserved the Medal of Honor. When I read it, I said, this guy deserved it. But he was an Indian, American Indian, from Oklahoma. And I think that's probably why he didn't get the Medal of Honor. But today, you know, when they revamped all those recently, and he probably would have had it upgraded except for one thing. He went crazy. One day, one of my Marine buddies called me and said that Billy's wife called him from the VA hospital and they need some help down. He's got a Vietnamese nurse and he's going crazy. We walk in, for some reason this woman grabbed us and says, "Are you here to see Billy Walkabout?" And we said, "Yeah." Said, "Come with me." And he had showed up with the ninja fighting knives. His wife showed up with a pistol in her bra, and he was going crazy because he had a Vietnamese nurse. She handed us a brochure and said, "This is what he's handing out." He had made up a formal printed brochure that he had been gone from private to colonel in 9 years, which is impossible to do. And all these medals he'd received along with the DSC, and he'd just gone crazy. I mean, he had the DSC, which is next to the Medal of Honor. If he had not gone crazy and published this thing and got it in the VA system, you know, nobody goes from private to colonel in 9 years. And all these other awards he had got, he was Special Forces. But it's really sad because he's dead now. He died a couple of years ago from something. But he should be, if you go there in the 45th Division and they still have it on display, read his Distinguished Service Cross citation, because if anybody deserved the Medal of Honor, and I know he didn't get it because he was Indian. Just say things like that are what's tragic. Yeah.
I would like to thank you as someone who has benefited from growing up in a democracy. I would like to thank you for your service and your dedication and your sacrifice to your country. And as a historian, I'd like to thank you for sharing your story with us.
You get me off soapbox, I don't quit talking.